One, and there we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to RSP Podcast. I'm here with my friend Callum. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you for coming on. So today we're just gonna basically. So Callum's a friend of mine who we've been friends for quite a few years, and quite recently you went interrailing over Europe. Is that correct?
Yeah. Last February I went.
Yeah. And so and this was your first time like traveling on your own, right? So this was the first experience that you got. And how long did you go for?
I went for about, I think it was 2 weeks. So yeah, 14 or 15 days technically, if you count all the bits on either end.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so about 2 weeks.
And then so sort of like I can't forget this is bad, you're my friend, but I can't remember how old are you? So
I'm 24.
24. So this was
Yeah.
and then that was so like you're 24, you're 24. So what was it that inspired you to sort of just go this time to just think, you know what, I'm going to do it now at 24? Because I obviously I started and quite a lot of my other friends they started quite young.
Yeah.
So like when they were 18, 19. So it's just yeah.
It's strange because to be fair, it's not like it's a very new thing for me in terms of just traveling, because all throughout my life, I've gone to loads of different places, especially around the UK mostly. So when I grew up, we had a house in Wales, so I would probably spent about half my childhood in Wales. So I was no stranger to, long car trips to Wales and that kind of thing. My family are also from Scotland, so I've, travelled to a lot of places in Scotland, a lot of places in England, Wales, been to Ireland and things like that. So that growing up, it wasn't actually. I was no stranger to traveling, and going to other places as well. So I went to America with my dad when I was about 18, and other than that, we've been sort of to loads of places all over Europe. I think when I was about, must have been about 20, 21, when I had my first actual holiday without parents. So I think that was in France, actually. And I just went with a friend of mine, and it was really fun. And after that, I was sort of left with a taste for it. And one of the big things about that trip was thinking, oh, we went to France and it was really nice, but you notice how close some other countries are, and you just think, we'd had another day, we probably could have gone into Belgium or one of those places. And I think from there, it sort of started in my head of thinking, why don't you actually do, proper traveling, a proper, backpack, and just go on. I never intended to go alone at the beginning. I did intend to go with a friend of mine, but then just several things happened, and in the end, I had a conversation with my friend at work, and I was nervous about going traveling alone. The friend I was talking to is actually from Denmark, and they've done a lot of traveling, and they kind of talked me into it. So they made a load of really good points about how, you're on your own time when you go alone, and also you're way more approachable. So yeah, it came to a point where I just took the plunge really, and I just thought, sod it, I'm doing this. I've wanted to do it for a while. I don't know what took so long, and I don't know why I haven't really done one since. Um, but yeah, I think that was it. It was just a sort of something in me just sort of kicked me forward and decided I'd do it alone.
Yeah, and I think like this is kind of the anxiety of almost everyone who's never traveled alone and stuff, etc. And it's the worry of being on your own and not making friends and that sort of that fear of being lonely on another side of the world and you could be stuck there for well, we're not stuck there, but you could be there for a while. But like I mean, I think it was even the same for me when I backpacked the Middle East last year. I mean, although I traveled quite a lot extensively before that. I'd never done such an extensive trip by myself. And even though I did have friends meeting me out there at stops along the way for 2 week periods and such. It was still nerve-wracking that you have to spend a lot of that time on your own. And I think kind of what people are kind of scared of as well is that kind of being left alone with your own thoughts.
Yeah, especially as you say, you have a lot of anxieties when you're going to do a big trip like this alone as well. And then you start to think of, everyone's heard horror stories of people traveling, and I don't know, bad things happen sometimes, and you do sort of think of yourself in that situation. Am I just going to become another one of those sort of statistics of traveling gone wrong? So I think the onus is really, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, I think whereas a lot of those fears are legitimate, that does sort of melt away when you're actually, there in the thick of it, traveling. It all just sort of melts away. All my anxieties just were completely overshadowed by my sheer joy just to be there. But what I will say is the onus is on people that go traveling alone to read up on stuff, to make sure you're not getting yourself into sticky situations, and to make sure that you've got enough money, you've got things like access to maps and a phone at all times, that you're not going to do stupid stuff. You're not. Also, another thing is that when you're going traveling, regardless of where you're going and whether you like it or not, you are a kind of representative of your own country when out there. So the onus is also on you to be respectful as well.
True. So
and I
true.
think as long as you're respectful, actually good things go your way.
Yeah, exactly. And as well, going back to when I was in Jerusalem, is that I was really nervous as well, and I got there and I was really shy, etc. But people welcoming, etc. And you realize quite quickly that almost everyone is in the same boat. Not many people go traveling for such a long time with someone, because obviously work and other commitments, not everyone can commit to such a big time period as well. But it's people like yourself, like me, who just have the get-go to just think, you know what, I'm just going to do it and go. And those are the people who have really great experiences. Yeah. So take me through your route. Go on, where did you start?
So I started I live in Colchester, so I went from here, and then I decided to start in Brussels. Felt like so to give some background, obviously during the time that I went traveling, we were in this big sort of political turmoil with the European Union over Brexit and a number of other things. And part of me sort of wanted to, because I was a big part of that, conversation. And I don't know, some part of me just wanted to, I think it was so easy to get into this conversation about Europe and that kind of thing, and sort of forget all the stuff that's actually in Europe. So for me, part of that was kind of a refresher to so I'll start in Brussels and I'll do the proper sort of European tour. And I was really interested to gauge the kind of consensus, the kind of the feeling over in Brussels, as well as before I'd only seen it from the UK. So I was interested to see how they were sort of dealing with things like Brexit and the ongoing kind of political turmoil. But I also have a friend that lives in Brussels. He's a friend of yours as well.
Yeah, very good.
So
Yeah.
that was nice as well. It was nice to start off somewhere where, first of all, I've been there before. I've been to Brussels before, but about 10 years beforehand. But it was nice to go somewhere where you know someone, because it gives you a bit more security. And I think that's what you need at the beginning of the trip. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
So I went.
That's actually a very good point. Yeah, I've never even thought of that before, but yeah, that's a very good point.
So I went to Brussels, stayed there for a couple of days, and then from there I went to Amsterdam. I've been to Amsterdam a couple of times in my life. Love Amsterdam. I love mainly sort of the museums and the cafes, and I don't know, something about Amsterdam. It's a very chilled out place. I like the energy there. It's a great place to sort of just kick back for a couple of days. So I went to Amsterdam, and then I went to Germany, but I went to.
But before we hold it, get onto that. So let's just quickly rewind to Brussels. So where were you staying? Were you staying in a hostel, or were you? And was this like one of your first experiences staying like by yourself in a hostel? How long did you stay there for?
Technically, no to the first part of that. So I have stayed in hostels before, and I have done alone as well, but only for like a night. And actually, when we went to Denmark, I did spend a night in a hostel. It was a separate hostel to the one you and the other guys were staying in. So
yeah, of course. I completely forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Although weirdly, it was right across the street,
It
which
was
we
right
didn't
across
know
the
until.
street. Yeah. Because you were already there by the time I woke up. So
I annoyed a lot of people that night because I hadn't been to. I hadn't really checked in proper. I think I checked in, but hadn't left any stuff there or gone to make the bed. So I got in about 1 a.m. and the bed was unmade and everyone was asleep.
Oh,
And I
it's worse,
for a
isn't
few
it?
minutes tried to like make this bed, and it was just so not. I was like, oh, sod it, and I just got in with
Mm.
like all the stuff on top of me, and yeah, I think I woke a few people up.
Oh
But
yeah. Yeah, it's awkward. I had a similar situation when I was in Finland, and like I had to like jump onto the top bunk, which was awkward enough, and it was really creaky, and the bed wasn't made. I was like, crap, what am I gonna do? I was like, oh, the duvets are on the floor. I have to jump back, and then I did, and then my book fell off the bed, and I think that woke everybody up, and everyone, yeah, I was glad I checked out the hostel 2 days after.
yeah, oh my God,
Pretty
so I
good.
couldn't look anyone in the eye the next morning. But
Yeah.
so to answer the other part of your question, which I think was um
Like this was your first time staying in it for an extended period of time, right?
right, yeah, I mean, although every hostel I stayed in was only a couple of nights, I think the one I stayed in most was in Berlin, and that was mainly to do with traveling times. It takes quite a long time to get, from the Netherlands to Germany anyway, so it
Mm.
just felt like a good idea to stay an extra night. Um,
Your so like as you said, obviously you were nervous about making friends. Like, did you straight away make friends in Brussels in that hostel, or like were you just because I know my mate, so I'm just gonna go meet him, or like do you know what I mean? Did you make the first approach? Were you outgoingly social, or was it someone who approached you?
so I was very outgoing. I felt, that's from the offset. I knew you have to be outgoing. You can't just be a,
Fair
grumpy
enough.
bastard in the corner and expect people
Yeah,
to come over to you.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. I'm guilty of doing that myself sometimes. So yeah, I can say that sounded
no,
nice.
I kind of do like that whole the brooding traveller look.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. You're only there for a few days, like slightly mysterious, like, oh, where's he going?
exactly, like who is this man? Um, but I was quite outgoing and I did say hello to people. But I think the first day in Brussels was a bit. It wasn't really what I expected because I got to the room, it was empty. There were people staying there who I didn't see until the night, until they were asleep. So, so in terms of people in my room, didn't really hit it off with them on the first day. So mainly because I just didn't really see them. Went to the bar, which was quite busy, and again didn't really speak to anyone. Other
Like,
than a couple of people
or-
at the bar, sort of made some sort of chit chat and that kind of thing, but nothing really much. But on that day anyway, I did go and meet my friend
Mm,
who was living in Brussels. It
yeah.
wasn't because I'm not making any headway at the hostel, so I was going to meet up. I had planned to meet up with them
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah. And like, and what's cool, obviously, about like being with a local is that like, because I remember when I went to Brussels with him as well. I don't know if he wants to be named, so we won't, but we'll just call him Person N. But he like what's cool is that you get shown around like. And you get shown around by a local who knows like the other really cool spots because most people I say like who I met who've been to Brussels just say they spent like 2 days. It's really nice. It's in the town centre, but like my friend took me to like this really cool district, like like did he take you to Little Congo? I think it's called Little Congo.
He didn't. We got very close to it, but
Yeah.
I can't remember what we did. I think he had to go and meet. Yeah, I think he had to go meet his mother, so it was kind of cut short in that regard. But we had a nice lunch together and everything like that. That was really nice. He showed me a few spots for good food, and yeah. The second night in Brussels was very good because I got moved. I think that the room actually lost my towel, but they were nice enough to give me another one, which I would later go on to lose in Germany. But um, the second night, I was moved to another room, and it was a much better room because it was more communal. It had like a table in the middle, and literally from the offset, I go into this room. This big friendly Swedish guy sitting there, an Australian girl, Brazilian girl, and literally within seconds, just you want a beer? Come sit with us, and we just talk for hours. And then later on, I went out with one of them into the city. I went for a drink with them, and then was like, let's go out to the city, let's have a walk around, let's see some of the other bars and things like that. So second day, absolutely.
Ah, lovely. And then you only stayed 2 days in Brussels, Amsterdam. Was it a similar situation?
Yeah, exactly. So a
Yeah,
couple
I
of
mean in
days there,
Amsterdam,
and then a
pretty
couple of
much
days.
everyone's chilled out, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The hostel at Amsterdam was weird, man.
Oh,
It was
really?
really weird. It was like it shouldn't have been there because it was above a coffee shop. It was actually part of the coffee shop.
Well,
So
it wasn't a bulldog, was it? It
no,
was
no, 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 no. No, it was I can't remember its name. I think it was something really weird like Bob's Hostel.
nice.
Shout out Bob's Hostel.
Yeah.
What was really weird was the check-in was down the street from the actual hostel. So I'd have to go all the
No,
way down there and then go all the way back.
yeah, I've stayed in places like this. It was really confusing. Yeah,
Really
okay.
weird. But I think it was just because you go up from this coffee shop and there's all these dormitories upstairs, but it's so small and the hallways are like so narrow and everything. It just didn't seem like all the rooms should, it felt like all the rooms had been crammed up there. But I mean, it was fine for 2 days.
I think Amsterdam is a bit like that, though. All the buildings are kind of like crammed together and like leaning sideways. But like, I was thinking about it I was actually thinking about it today. Like, I do really like Amsterdam. It is cool. I've been like quite a lot of times now, and I always just end up getting wasted over there. But I was actually thinking like I would say Copenhagen is like a quieter, prettier like version, and I actually quite like. I was thinking I quite like Copenhagen probably more than Amsterdam.
It depends where you go, and it also depends what you're doing, really. The thing I
Yeah.
liked about Amsterdam, it actually, I'm very into art and things like that. So the last time I went to Amsterdam, not this trip, the one before, I visited the Van Gogh Museum,
Beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, I've done that.
absolutely
Love
adored it. But then
it.
this time I went to the Kunstmuseum, which was amazing. No, sorry, not Kunstmuseum, the Rijksmuseum, which is a huge sort of art museum.
With the tunnel through it, correct? When you
Yes,
walk through it, yeah, yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
that's the
There's
one.
this next to the I. Is it I love Amsterdam sign?
Yes,
That I
yes,
love
that's in the
Amsterdam
back.
sign.
That's
Yeah,
based in
yeah,
the
yeah.
backyard. But yeah, I spent about 5, 6 hours in this museum, and it's one of those times where you're really glad that you're on your own because it's just
Mm,
I'm just here to indulge,
mm.
and no one can tell me otherwise. There's no one tugging at at my elbow saying, "Come on, let's go, let's go have lunch," and this kind of thing. It was so good, and just being in this sort of museum, something like 15 euros, which was probably one of the more expensive
15
things to do
euros a
in
day.
Amsterdam. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, sorry, I got lost my train of thought there. 15 euros for the entry, yeah,
Yeah, which was a bit more expensive than other things I'd done sort of in Amsterdam, but it was totally worth it. Totally worth it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I actually love just sort of walking around the canals and
Mm,
finding different cafes and things
yeah.
like that and just little things to do. So
It's quite easy
Denmark,
to
on
get
the other
lost and
hand,
find your way
I
back.
do love it, but I don't think I've been enough really. Because every
Where?
time I've been to Denmark, it's been
Sorry.
like for a day or two. I think with Denmark, I think it's a
Oh,
bad comparison with me because I've done, I've whenever I've gone to Denmark, it's only been for like a day or two.
I see.
You had the real experience there.
Yeah, I see. Okay. All right. And then so we've covered Amsterdam, and then now where was it? Berlin now.
Well, so the beauty of having like an Interrail pass, so the one I had, it was something like you get 5 or 6 days of travel, and within those days you basically have unlimited travel. I mean, some services do require like a reservation, but very few. You
Mm,
can mainly just hop on any train. So I stopped off at places like I think I stopped at Hanover on the way,
yeah. How long? What? Just for a couple of hours?
just for a few hours, just for some
Yeah.
lunch and things like that. I mean, I think I've mainly slept. I didn't get a lot of sleep the last night in Amsterdam, so I slept a fair bit. Got woken up very sort of jarringly by this big German man, like train conductor. I was just asleep, and he was just like poking me, just like, "My friend, your tickets." I was like, what? And I sort of just shoved my ticket and passport into his hand, and he sort of handed my passport back. I was like, I don't need this. I was like, really? That's something I have never gotten used to, the kind of Schengen area where it's just like I just pull out like I had my passport the whole time. The only place it was ever checked was obviously the airport in Hungary and like St. Pancras,
It is
like getting
strange,
on
isn't
the
it? I
Euro. It's
still can't
really weird.
that. It is strange. It is really strange. I suppose that is also like the beauty about traveling in Europe as well, is that there is so much freedom, and
Mm.
unlike other places where, like in Asia and stuff, you have to sort a visa out maybe a week or so beforehand, or leave your like passport with a broker, etc., which
Yeah.
is fun. Um, And then so Hanover to, and then you stayed there for a little bit and then kept going?
and then arrived in Berlin quite late, as I recall. I think the train was rolling behind, so got there in the evening. The thing you sort of notice about Berlin when you're coming in, because the train will be above the city and you're coming in, it looked very dark.
When did you go? Sorry, February
It
was it?
says February, but it looked very
Yeah.
dark. But then once you're actually on the ground under the streetlights, it looks a lot different.
Hmm.
But I would say Berlin is a bit more daunting than places like Brussels and Amsterdam when you first arrive. Or this may just be the case because I arrived in the evening, but it did seem a bit more daunting, like maybe tread with a bit more caution
In
here.
what in what sense? Just because you know, what? Just because it's a bigger city, or like
Yeah, it
in
was
what sense?
yeah, it was bigger, but also the area I was going to, I think some of the streets looked a bit sort of I'm not going to say dodgy, but they seemed like if this was a street in the UK, I'd probably avoid it.
Oh, yes,
So,
I mean, I went to Berlin many years ago, and I still remember it as those kind of like side streets because, like you said, it's kind of like I mean, I can't even imagine. I've never been to New York. What am I thinking? Maybe like the way I imagine like Gotham or something is that the monorail, like it kind of feels like a monorail is running
yeah,
under the
the
city.
Narrows.
Yeah, like yeah, there's just some like it's just going over, like you're constantly under a bridge. So yeah, I do get that. And then some of the districts are a bit more run down. But I
Yeah.
wonder if that's more of it's going for like it's got quite like a youthful and like a young vibe to it, doesn't
Well,
it?
yeah, I arrived in like, in the night time and also away from the kind of more active parts of the city. So where all the nightclubs and things like that, that was quite a fair bit from where I was staying.
Okay.
I think because, you arrived in this big city late at night, of course it's going to be a bit more daunting. But once you're sort of in there, it's great.
Mm.
The hostel was hit and miss. I mean, I don't like to judge the trip based on the hostels. It's more, the stuff you do. So it
Mm.
was kind of hit and miss. Like, for example, you could only get Wi-Fi in the lobby, like not in
Yeah,
your room.
I've stayed in a lot of places like that. That's that. Yeah, I've stayed in quite a lot of places like that. Yeah.
Plus, my roommates would change on a daily basis. I was sharing with these two Italian guys who were very nice, but they were very, very loud at night and they kept blasting the heating, which kept waking me up. In the middle, I
That
kept waking up in the middle of the night sweating. Just like, oh my God.
that sucks. Yeah, that sucks. But so what'd you get up to in Berlin? Because I don't know if I've ever spoken to this about you. You're much of a history buff.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
because I mean Berlin for me, like I remember I went on a history trip, like I say, many years ago. But oh man, Berlin, I loved it for that.
absolutely. So I have an A level in history, but I'm always been a big fan of history. My dad was a history teacher, so naturally, I've had some of that growing up. But European history in particular, very interested in.
Mhm.
Some like medieval and that, but mainly kind of modern European history.
Oh,
So I'm very aware, like going into a lot of these places, the sensitivity around some subjects and things like that, which becomes very apparent in Berlin. So Berlin is an amazing city. So I remember getting up the next day after arriving, and it is like a completely different city in the daytime. It is just this amazing city. And one of the pictures that I sent you from my travels, so the one of Berlin that I chose to send you.
so let me just pull that
Yeah.
up and where we go. Yeah, here we go. It's the one. It's the one. What am I looking at here? What's on the floor?
So that one in Berlin is taken at the Jewish Museum,
Okay.
which I believe in German, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, is the Jüdischen Museum Berlin,
Hmm.
or Jüdisch. Um, so this is the Jewish Museum, and it is designed in a very strange way that kind of echoes, I believe, sort of echoes maybe the concentration camps and how they were built.
I'm seeing now as I zoom in on the picture that everything on the floor, all those things on the floor, they're faces made
Yes.
out
So
of
the picture I've sent
or
you
something.
is this part in the bottom. So the Jewish Museum, it's not just a big sort of Holocaust museum. It is literally the Jewish Museum. So the Holocaust is obviously a big part of that, especially in the city that it's in. There is another section which is all about Israel and places like Jerusalem, and
Yeah.
it's really worth exploring because there's so much sort of rich history that they go into. And also, yeah. So, but the picture I've sent you, so there's this part at the lower levels of the Jewish Museum where there are thousands of metal faces. They're sort of discs. They're quite heavy, and they're all sort of faces. And each of these faces, I believe, is supposed to represent someone who died in the Holocaust.
Are
And
they individually designed? Sorry to interrupt. Are they individually designed, or do
I'm
you?
not sure. I don't believe so, given how some of them are quite monotonous. But
Yeah,
that's the point.
that's
But
what I'm thinking.
you walk over them. You
Hmm.
walk over these faces, and that's quite eerie. It's you sort of have these. It the noise when you walk across is this sort of creepy, metal shifting.
Mm, yeah. I actually do get what you mean now. Actually, thinking more back to my own thing in Berlin, it is quite sort of chilling scenes. And the reason I asked about why their individual faces is because did you visit the Blocks
Yeah,
Memorial?
so this
Yeah.
is actually very close. So this
Yeah.
is, I think,
Yeah.
this is quite close to Potsdam Square. So, and it's not, I think it's called the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe, which is the blocks that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So this is, yeah, it's very close to that. And that as well is quite something to behold. I
That
think
is. Yeah.
the sense that you get from places like Berlin and actually Europe, because all across this trip, I mean, history is a big interest of mine anyway, so I was interested to learn. But something that obviously comes up a lot is World War II
Mm.
and therefore the Holocaust. And the impression that you get in a lot of these European cities, especially places like Berlin, it's like a glass house. It is fragile. You
Mm.
know, people are kind of anxious to talk about these things, and when they do, it's very much in the vein of, never again, never again. And this mentality is very hard hit. It's very sort of hammered into everyone's psyche in these places. So especially like Berlin, you will find lots of things like this, and they really don't hold back in terms of the punches they pull, in terms of really letting you know what this was like, and really letting you know the kind of guilt, I think, the kind of collective guilt that is felt as a nation, like in places like Germany. Um, it's yeah, like I said, it's incredibly fragile, and this is very much still on the public's minds, even after all these years.
No, I think this is I think you've got a very good point there, and I think that's exactly like the almost the whole of Germany kind of feels like that as well. It's this idea of never forgetting. It's that you can't brush over what happened in history, but you can learn from it. And it's I think that it's the quote. I mean, I don't know if you actually been to the Auschwitz camp.
No, I haven't.
And
No.
so outside of there on a signboard, I cannot remember who for the life of me who the quote is by, but it's a very famous quote: "Is that those who forget history are doomed to repeat
I
it."
do to repeat it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
this is in Berlin. This is very, very relevant. And going on, like, for example, this Jewish this memorial on the blocks.
yeah.
Each block is obviously individually designed. It is each its own shape, so it's its own shape and size to represent the individuals who lost their lives in the Holocaust.
Mm.
But it's actually quite interesting that just around the corner and probably built slightly over is Hitler's bunker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I visited, whereas I haven't visited places like the Auschwitz camp, I have visited my fair share over the years, not just on this trip, but going back other, traveling I've done. When I have visited, I think I visited one in France, which was one of Hitler's bunkers when they occupied France, and it could have even been in the Vichy side,
Mm.
but that was quite I think I was about 12 the first time I saw one of these bunkers, where it was so it was a summer, just to paint the picture for you, it was a summer day, but then when you step inside this thing, which is sort of the thickness of the walls, we're talking about the thickness of a house. So once you go inside, it suddenly becomes very cold very quickly. and then you sort of walk through these places, and you sort of just imagine the people that were there. And these were used to imprison people. And I remember just sort of being in this area. It makes you very uncomfortable to be in the area, because outside as well, there are only crows, for example, sort of circling above this structure. There are craters outside from where you see the Allies when they eventually moved in and took the place. So there are still craters there that gather water in the rainier months. So, and I think that's also interesting with places like France, places like Germany, places like, Austria and all the rest, that had a very sort of key role, that were either occupied during the World War or were part of the invading forces. Each of them have this reluctance, I've noticed, to like tear down some of these structures. And I think it's for a very good reason. It's the reason that you said. It's this mantra of do not forget, because we will do this again. This will happen again if we let it. So I think that's why there's been this reluctance to get rid of sort of some of the bunkers and some of the places that we've seen, because it very much is about hammering home that point of we need to remember, or it will happen.
And I mean, and it echoes very true for, the time we're living in now, with the rise of the far right in Europe again. Now it is, these sorts of events and stuff, they're more important than ever to remember. Remember that we can't step that way back.
But also, we're talking about all kinds of heightened tensions across not just Europe but the world. Even with what we're currently experiencing, that's it's a lot of pressure on nations to place blame on each other, and people as well. I think it's not just about, I don't think it's about just one ideology. I think it's a warning to all ideologies in a way, because anyone can turn extreme, and everyone is capable of unspeakable acts of evil that echo forever in a nation's consciousness. But it's very humbling to sort of visit these places, especially and again, like the Jewish Museum, the way it's sort of constructed, they'll have parts of it with very sharp corners and parts of it that are colder than others and things like that, and all of it is supposed to disorientate you. Even the entrance to the building is, well, for me it was a bit hard to find because of the way it's sort of shaped. So all of it is about kind of taking you out of your comfort zone and really plunging you into the horror of this nation's history.
Exactly, and like as we will go, as we've just, that's really what we were saying, is that these horrors have shaped the nation's history, and it's important to never forget these types of things, because a lot of the some of these things in more recent times, for example, I remember when I went to the killing fields in Cambodia. That was like some horrific stuff there, but that was in my parents' lifetime.
Yeah.
It wasn't too long ago. Maybe if my dates are right, maybe about 50 years ago, I believe it happened in the 70s, late.
But you say 70s. That as well, and I remember going to New York and visiting Ground Zero, of the site of an attack that took place in my lifetime. And I do kind of remember, even though I was quite young, but that again, it's very strange to sort of visit these places. But I think it is immensely rewarding in so much as, because I think these things like this run the risk of becoming almost trivialized until you really come face to face with them and you really experience that. So But something else I wanted to sort of talk about in regards to Berlin was the kind of, there's lots of, I guess you could say it's a city of secrets, all these sort of secret places and all these amazing places to discover. And I think one isn't really ever done exploring places like Berlin. So I also went to, on a whim, I went to visit the Berliner Unterwelten, which is the Berlin underworlds, which are a series of subterranean sort of tours that you can do. And the one I did was under the Berlin Wall. So a guide actually took us under the former Berlin Wall to go and visit these kind of networks of tunnels, and because they used to have, trains under there, but also show us all the kind of escape tunnels that people used to, escape from East Berlin into the West, and to tell us all these stories about that. That I, again, would highly recommend to anyone.
That sounds really, really cool. And again, I mean, we've just been talking about the Holocaust, but I mean, of course, the Berlin Wall, that was only maybe 40 years ago now. I mean, that is unbelievable that Germany was divided for so long. Like the wall as well, the Wall Museum, Checkpoint Charlie, all the interesting stuff.
Yeah,
about
I went there as well.
Very fascinating. You hear some very interesting stories about people climbing over the wall and the quest to live free. And you hear, I mean, did you hear, obviously there's people tunneling under there. There was one about a guy who tried to paraglide over there.
There was one guy that, this was my favorite story. So he showed us this big map, and it had all the it was a big map of Berlin, and it showed all the different routes that people had used to tunnel out of the city, out of East Berlin into West. So some of them were, so you had sort of straight, solid lines that meant successful, as in they actually got across, and then some that were either, there were dotted lines that either meant they had been abandoned or they'd been discovered. And then there was this sort of big little sort of section. We asked what that was, and he said, oh yeah, so this guy once essentially just got fed up, stole a Soviet tank and drove through the wall into West Berlin.
I've heard this story, and there's actually quite a few absolutely crazy stories over the wall. Like there's from west to east, there's two stories I heard of people jumping from the west into the east. One because they were criminals, and so they were running from the police and they didn't know what to do, so they just jumped over the wall. And the Soviets caught them and they didn't know what to do with them, so they took them into an office they called Moscow, and then basically just gave them breakfast and then sent them back to the West, because they were like, this has never happened before.
No one's ever come in.
Yeah, I don't know what to do. And another one I heard is that a bunch of people jumped over to pick flowers. I think that's quite a famous story.
I hadn't heard that one, but
yeah,
it was.
Maybe I might be wrong, but
it was interesting to sort of. I had a really good guide as well. I love it when guides are kind of really passionate about the subject. So we did, it was something like 3 hours in different locations as well. The ticket for the Berliner Unterwelten doubled up as a metro ticket, because it was literally we had to go to a different location at one point to continue the tour. But the guide was sort of telling us, and really, he was really good at sort of shaping this narrative of how things in East Berlin gradually but very eerily changed in terms of, when the separation first came in. I mean, they didn't just put up a wall straight away. It was it was more of an abstract line before then, and then gradually and slowly,
fire,
and then it also becomes this, there were actually kind of two walls in a way, because you had the wall and then you had another wall sort of adjacent to it, and in between you would have, I think they called it the death run. So this would be the stretch in which it was they would have snipers manning that part of the wall. So essentially, it was, you had to jump one wall, run across this strip, and jump over onto, get over the other side as well. And it was within that main strip now that they ended up shooting, the most people.
Yeah, I mean, just for prospective people who don't know it, it was just a wall, it was just a wall separating it. But like you say, it was the death run. I think there might have been mines, there was snipers. That it was that stretch of no man's land, which was virtually impossible to get through. And exactly. if you didn't make it, you got shot, and you were left to bleed out.
Yeah,
they were merciless.
Yeah, it's crazy. Especially, before that, it started off early on. Some people who still had sort of businesses or houses that were overlooking the wall would jump out of windows and things like that. And the real lengths people went to, the real desperation that they had to leave. But then I heard another story where this old guy, had dug a tunnel for he and his wife to escape East Berlin. And he had taken deliberately a bit longer, because he wanted to ensure that the tunnel was big enough for his wife to walk instead of having to crawl, because he wanted her to leave East Berlin with some dignity. Now, it's a lovely story, but listening to it, part of me is just thinking, just get out, get out of East Berlin.
Like there's no one's going to be watching. Do you know what I mean? It's just for your self satisfaction.
Exactly. I think that's a lovely sentiment, but I think given the context, I don't think she really cared.
It's only a lovely sentiment if it, you know what I mean? If it works. If it doesn't work, then it's all for nothing. But yeah, you are right, and you do hear some really really heartbreaking stories coming out of when that wall came up. There's a really famous picture. I'm sure you've seen it. It's a black and white picture of a soldier jumping over the wall.
Yes.
I'm not sure. I believe he was a German soldier.
Yes.
But he jumped over the wall when they were putting it. Well, the barbed wire when they were putting it up. He was just like, you know what, I'm running for it, and he just hopped on a tram and left.
Yeah.
And he lived his life for the rest. I mean, the wall was put up in 1961, so I guess this is when this happened. And he lived the rest of his life. He set up a new life, still missing his family and friends on the other side of the wall. But and when the wall came down, he went to go find them, and they rejected him because they were like, you left us here, you didn't think about us, you left us. And unfortunately, he fell into depression, and he ended his life. So it's really, there's really some really sad stories coming out of the wall, and how Germany was separated. And like we say, that isn't too long ago. A lot of people would probably feel that separation. You hear other stories of, people going to bars and spending the night at their friend's house, and when they woke up the next morning, the wall was up and they couldn't go back and see their friends or their family, or it wasn't wise to. People who worked in the east and west part of the city didn't have a job anymore.
But I can't really imagine that, but it definitely leaves its mark. I would say the eastern and western parts of Berlin are still fundamentally quite different to each other.
They're very different, yeah.
Even without the presence of the wall, because I think the wall was more of it's what it signifies, this great separation between the two. And yeah, it's still very much felt. So when you go from, you really know when you're in the east, and you really know when you're in the west. So moving on now to after Berlin, I went to, where was that? It was Prague next, but I stopped off on the way in Dresden for a few hours to have lunch. Dresden again is so beautiful.
Really? I've heard of it, but it's never. Yeah, no, I've never. I've only been to Berlin in Germany, really. So
there are two things that become very apparent about Dresden just from stepping off a train. One, it's possibly one of the most beautiful cities in all of Europe.
Oh wow, that's a statement.
And two, it is very very political. So I don't know if you know much about Dresden, but it's known, I think, to be kind of politically volatile and have a lot of kind of revolutionaries and things like that. I mean, even when I was there, that was quite apparent. There was a sort of demonstration, I think, taking place in the street, a big communist demonstration.
Oh, so we're talking communists here.
Well, this one was. I mean, I think they see it of every political.
Yeah, just a city of radical thought. Okay.
Exactly. So there was a big sort of communist demonstration when I was there. I mean, there was in Brussels when I went there as well. There was like another communist.
In most capital cities, you'll find one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Weekends or something.
So yeah, that was it was lovely to spend a couple of hours there and just have lunch there and just take it all in, really. And then I got back on the train and I went to Prague. So Prague is not somewhere I've been before.
I've never been.
Prague is definitely somewhere I will be going back to.
Yeah, a lot of I'd love to go there. I've been meaning to organise a weekend to go there for a long time. I just have never got around to it. But yeah, go on, tell us how great it is.
So where to start with Prague? So we kind of touched upon this a lot, obviously, during the podcast we did recently, where we talked about the kind of different hustles that are going on in Prague, and how the guide that I had on my walking tour he said we also call this scam city because there's a lot of scams going on and that kind of thing. But I digressed on some of that. I want to talk more about the more positive parts of Prague, which are far more prominent. So Prague is, for lack of a better word, dirt cheap in I mean, I said that my hostel was €3.50 a night.
I mean, that is unbelievable.
It was unbelievable, with a spa as
be
well.
a king.
Exactly, and some people were living there
Yeah.
because it just was that easy. Other than that, it's you could get so some interesting history, and again, we're going into the history here about Prague, and obviously it was the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia as it once was communist at one point. So that's very much still in the in the public consciousness there. But what's more interesting than its communist past is the kind of, I guess you could say, the course correction since. So Prague, looking at it now, you wouldn't guess that it was communist because of how many kind of capitalist enterprises are there. In fact, I think Prague has the most kind of Starbucks and is it most Starbucks and possibly McDonald's or one of the other, has has the most of those for any sort of city by terms of like how many per people.
Yeah, I think this is like as well. This is quite common across a lot of Eastern Europe, isn't it? Because once the communists fell, that I mean, and actually, I think, I mean, I may be wrong there, but I think actually Putin had already sold off a lot of the companies in Russia before communism in Russia fell. So that's how he actually made his kind of millions, is that he'd sold off a whole load of businesses pre the fall of communism. So we're going to continue.
So, for instance, we're standing in this one square, and the guide pointed to this McDonald's, and he says, this is actually quite a historic McDonald's. It's not something you hear all the time. But he said the reason why is, he said it was the first capitalist enterprise to open after the fall of communism. And as such, there was this tremendous kind of hype around it. You literally had people queuing around the block to try their first, McDonald's hamburger after the fall of communism.
I can imagine.
And now that one square has like 4 McDonald's. So they really did. But again, the kind of prices. What's interesting is the beer and things like that. So
cheaper than water, am I right?
It's not just the price, it's where it's available as well. So yes, it is cheaper than water in some respects. I remember going to a shop, the cider was cheaper than the chocolate. So naturally I had cider for lunch instead of
Of course. We've all got
anything sensible.
And it gives you energy, it gives you fuel. So.
Exactly. No, but when in Rome or when in Prague.
When in Prague.
Do as the Czechs do. So yeah, it was something like the equivalent of about 50p in pounds. So that was insane. Also, I went into Burger King where they had on tap, I don't mean in bottles or cans, I mean on tap Pilsner for something like 80 pence a pint. And the whole reason I got it from Burger King was because I saw it through the window, and I just said to the guy I was walking around with, I was like, I know this is going to sound weird, but I need to be able to say that I had a pint in Burger King.
Yeah, I know, because this is actually a thing. They do this in France, in McDonald's and stuff in France and stuff, is that they do sell beer. They do sell beer with McDonald's. And I remember when someone told me that, I was like, what? Like, I couldn't do that.
But on tap as well, like a proper kind of beer tap, like to pour pints at a Burger King was just insane. So, so lots of sort of cheap things like alcohol and things like that. They're also really weirdly into so another little bit of context. So in Prague, for example, things like cannabis are decriminalized. So whereas they're not legal to sell or technically to carry, there is no real, consequence to having it.
No,
so as such, in a lot of these shops, a lot of the sort of novelty shops, they're selling what looks like cannabis. It's not real. It's sort of a synthetic CBD, which will do some stuff. It's not it's not going to really have much an effect on you, but they really lean into it like it's the real thing, like you're back in Amsterdam, because they love tourists in Prague. So, but you even have stuff like cannabis flavored beer and cannabis flavored cookie, and it really is flavored, not it has like it doesn't have THC in it. It's literally
Yeah.
flavored like it. But look, there's all this sort of novelty stuff like that. But also, I just loved the kind of energy of it. How you can sort of just walk around, and without a care in the world, and
Mm.
without even much of an itinerary, and you can literally just walk, and you will see some cool stuff, and you can stop for lunch at some really cool places. I had a halloumi kebab, which is something I haven't been able to find in the UK.
That sounds
Had
like
it
a dream.
there. It was amazing, and it was something like £2. So
Wow.
it was absolutely crazy, like how cheap things were. So, and yeah, the people there as well. Um, I just loved it. I can't say enough good things about Prague,
Uh,
really.
yeah, like one of my biggest regrets in life is that like I got accepted to do a an Easter semester at the St. Charles University in Prague. It was a sort of a special course, and I applied and I went through the whole process, and I was tried really hard to do it. It was in some sort of international relations um semester, but unfortunately it ran at the same time as my dissertation for my actual degree.
Ah,
Fortunately, I couldn't attend, and I was just devastated. It
yeah,
was
yeah,
devastated because it was something like they accepted me, and all I had to do was put in £600 for the accommodation, which would have included some meals as well. So
fair.
I was so disappointed with that, and I was thinking maybe I could try again, but I haven't got around to it since.
But I think, yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend Prague to anyone. But it's nice to know that that's a nice little sort of weekend getaway. Whenever, well, I
Mm,
mean, hopefully I'll be able to return, some point in the future.
yeah, yeah,
But it's what I love about it is this kind of you can essentially have nothing planned but end up doing loads of stuff. And it for me it was kind of this. Have you ever seen any? Have you ever seen Rich? Do you know Richard Linklater? He's a filmmaker,
no.
independent filmmaker. He's made films like Boyhood and Dazed and Confused and things
I,
like that.
I know the films. I don't know the.
Yeah. So he had a trilogy of films called the Before trilogy. So it was like Before Sunset, before no, sorry, it was Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight. Now, each of these films, like the first one, for example, is about two people that meet in Vienna, and the whole film is about 90 minutes of it's just an uncut conversation. It's two people walking around, Vienna, just talking to each other for the whole film.
Hmm.
And in that time, they explore like different, interesting concepts and philosophies and things like that, and it's really good. But that's very much what it felt like here. So I remember going from the hostel where I was talking to this, the online poker player,
Hmm.
guy that I met,
Yeah, yeah,
the future Dan Bazarian.
yeah.
Going straight from there to the walking tour, talking to people on the way to the walking tour, during the walking tour, afterwards, with people breaking off with people from the group, and I was like, you want to go get some lunch, walking from there. It felt like a huge uncut conversation for like the whole day of just like going, you're just walking, I must have walked about 20 miles or something in Prague. We're just looking at different things. We stop every once in a while, take a photo, or get something to eat, and you just talk. You just talk to complete strangers, and it ends up being some of the most amazing experiences of your life because uh, that's what it's all about, really. It's this sort of spirit of adventure and
It does.
sharing that with other people, and it's just talking to other people.
Yeah, and I mean as well, and that's like you say, that is the spirit of adventure, is sharing these sort of travelers' tales and meeting other people. And I mean, I don't know, do you still keep in contact with some of the people you met on this trip?
uh it's difficult. Some, yes, from time to time check in and say, hey, how you
Yeah.
doing, and that kind of thing. um it's difficult because I refer to them, the people that I meet on holiday, I refer to them as Mayfly friends, in the sense that they're usually just your friends for a day.
Yeah,
And there's something kind of beautiful about that as
I think
well, I find, because your whole relationship then it revolves around a very positive, experience that you had.
yeah,
So I think some part of you wants to hold on to that and just be like, no, if all our relationship was just around that, that would feel nice. So maybe it's some part of me is trying to idealize it, But I do try, I do wonder what they're up to and that kind of thing. I know some of them. What's interesting as well is you always meet at a fork in the road, because I was off to somewhere else after that, and they were, going off opposite directions to have, more adventures and more sort of stories like that, which kind of takes me on to the next stage of the trip, which was Austria. And again, Austria, never been there before, but I would 100% return to Austria. I mean, I would even consider living in Austria, because
Really?
I think so. Something about Austria is very special to me.
It is. It is very nice. I can only speak for Vienna, but Vienna is a very beautiful city. It doesn't remind me a bit of London, like more of a cleaner, sort of more efficient London.
Yeah, but I thought so I would say I'm conversational in German, but I wouldn't say I'm 100% fluent. But that's kind of nice to have that under the belt when you're visiting places like Berlin and Vienna, and where you can actually just have sort of a conversation with people, maybe in the native language. I hate being one of those tourists where you have to sort of say, sorry, English, do you speak? Whereas in these places, I could just go up to people. If I needed to know where something was, I knew how to ask, so.
And people actually take that, like, people actually are nicer to you, even if you fail at trying to speak in their language. People really, really do appreciate it when they tell that you're actually trying.
Yeah.
Except I mean, I don't know this is true, but this is just what I've heard, that apparently in China, if you try speak Mandarin, they just point and laugh at you. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've heard.
Possibly, but because it will probably sound daft if you try, because it's one of those. It's such an intricate language, and it's also so different to Eastern languages, so different to the ones of the West. We kind of have, all throughout Europe, there are things that we all kind of understand, and pretty much everyone speaks English. But I didn't want to just go into them with that mindset of, oh, everyone speaks English anyway, I'll be fine. So I did want to try and make the effort. The thing about Austria, so yeah, I think you do just get this sense of serenity in things, and everything that you go and look at is so sort of beautifully made. And so I remember going to like a butterfly house, where it was this huge sort of sanatorium for giant butterflies and things like that, which is just really surreal to be in.
Places like that, I think they're pretty cool, actually. Yeah,
because I met two people in Vienna on my first night and hung out with them the whole sort of 2 days. There were these lovely Austrian people, they're brother and sister. And it happened because in the hostel I was staying in, there was a bar on the basement level. So I just, went down there, sat there for 5 minutes, and then, they came along. They're like, hey, do you want to play giant Jenga with us? And then by the end of that, I remember going down I just hung out with them the whole time. The second night we went down into the bar, and it was full of Australians. I don't know what it was about Austria that attracts Australians, but it's just full of Australians, and we played Cards Against Humanity, and we drank into the night, and I think that's why. I think it's probably because some of my best memories come from Austria and that trip. And also just walking around anywhere was a delight to walk around. People were polite, the streets were clean, things just, I remember, because it's February, so just after Christmas, there was like I can't remember, it's like a big palace or something, but outside there's a big ice skating ring.
Is it the Habsburg Palaces?
Yes,
Habsburg Royal Palaces. Yeah, no, I never visited, but I did actually. I only know because I did some papers on it in university, and I actually was annoyed I didn't get the chance to go when I was in Vienna. Yeah, sorry, continue.
But no, that's what I mean. Just strolling about and just visiting different things. And again, I always have in my mind a few things that I want to go and see, but I like to sort of leave it open to chance, and also not have anything set in stone. So if anyone does suggest anything, you just sort of go with them. But I think that was why Austria, I think it was just because I had the best sort of experiences there with people. And also it just kind of, I felt very at ease in Vienna, like it was a city for me, like I could actually get on there and possibly, live there in the future if I wanted to. So that was such a nice surprise to have that.
That's nice when you find somewhere that, like, that you kind of that stays with you, and it's really unsurprising as well.
Yeah.
That's really nice, and it's actually already, so it already answers one of the questions I was going to ask you before, that what was the country that you had your favorite experiences in, or like your favorite country. But I think you've already answered that.
Yeah, definitely Austria, and I think that's the reason I sent you that. The picture I've chosen for Austria is basically just a street view of a sort of big old building, and that's the thing. Like Austria is just filled with these beautiful
I've seen this.
old buildings, and that's I think why you just feel you're quite small, looking around at so many big things, but you don't feel it doesn't feel intimidating to you.
Yeah, no, that's true. Did you see I believe it was St. Stephen's Cathedral in
Yes.
Austria? Yeah,
Oh my God.
in the Gothic, with the spire in the Gothic style architecture. It's very, very beautiful.
Yeah, I've got some
And
pictures of
whole
that
street
actually because I
around
went
it.
inside. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
sorry, I've got some pictures of that because I actually went inside.
Yeah, as did I. Yeah,
It's sort of you're separated because there's the bit for the people. I think we arrived and there was actually a mass going on. You can still go inside, but there's obviously a section at the front for the mass and then section for tourists. That must be very weird to have a church service whilst there's people milling about.
I think they just must be used to it though, because
Yeah.
I imagine they must be used to doing services, and like I imagine at Christmas and stuff, it must be heaving.
Comes with the territory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how long did you stay there for in Vienna?
Yeah, no, a couple of days again, 2 nights. So I guess you got a bit of a third day. But yeah, after that I took the shortest train trip after that. The longest I'd taken was definitely Amsterdam to Berlin, which is about 6.5 hours. But then I took the shortest one, which is about 2 hours, which was from Vienna to Budapest. And Budapest is where I ended my trip. Very different. You get the sense when you cross that border, that invisible little border, on the way from Austria to Budapest, everything kind of changes.
It's very different.
Changes, the vegetation and the soil sort of changes. I noticed that because you're going past a lot of farmland and things like that. It does. Instead, you do feel like, oh, this is more eastern. This is different to what I've experienced so far. But again, very pleasant. And on the train there as well. I mean, that's something I haven't really talked about, is the train journeys. You meet people on the train journeys.
Yes.
So I had a whole little group of Mayfly friends that I made on the trains as well. I remember speaking to this guy on the way to Budapest. It was actually because I was trying to order a drink from the guy the trolley. I didn't have enough. I can't remember what currency they were using, but I didn't have enough of either.
In where, sorry?
Well, it was on the train to Budapest. So I think they were either accepting
It would be euros or florins, right?
Well, that's the thing. I think it was one of the, and I'm not sure I had enough of either or something. And I was trying to, and then the guy just like, sorry, I'll help you out. I'll just give you extra 50, whatever, for the drink. And then we just started talking. He was a really nice guy. It turns out he was from London.
Oh, very nice.
There we go. So, but he was from Hungary. And he was, he went out there a lot because that's where his family were. But then I arrived in Hungary. Hungary, I spent a little less time in just because I flew back from Hungary, and airports, you always have to spend a ridiculous amount of time at an airport.
Yeah. And Budapest Airport isn't the most efficient.
No, it's not.
Kind of squeeze you through, and you have to like run past everybody to get through.
Yeah, it's a bit odd, but. One thing you notice that you get into Hungary is the smoking. I'm not trying to cast like a negative light on it. I mean that in the way of, because there's so many tobacconists, and also tobacco is incredibly cheap out there. So that's something you notice. There's this sort of culture around smoking and things like that, which is quite interesting.
Actually, may I just cut in there? I'm not 100% sure on this, but I actually believe this is something to do with the government. Is that the tobacconist, what is it? Right. So the chain of stores which are the tobacconists are the only one who have been given a permit to sell tobacco, because the owner of that chain supports the Prime Minister. And all the other tobacco chains which were around can no longer get that license because they do not support the current president.
Wow.
President
Orban.
President Viktor Orban. I believe that is the case. I think this is what I've heard from a friend of mine. And this is actually quite common a lot in Hungary. You do actually get a lot of things like this happening in Hungary. But I think this is the case, is that there's the more support and money that he gives to the president's campaign and the more support he funds, the more shops he can open, and which will encourage smoking.
And I'm just assuming they cut a lot of sort of taxes off of things like tobacco in a way that we do not. We probably have, like, most other kind of, us and other EU countries sort of really heavily tax things like sort of tobacco and things like that. But you notice out there it's very different. They don't have the warnings on the pack either, really. Oh, they might, but they still have. It's not all in black, and they don't have pictures on it and stuff like that. They might have something written in Hungarian, which wouldn't know.
But I mean, I don't want to speak too wrong, but I think there is also probably just a bit of a culture of it as well. Is that just like, people smoke for generations and more.
Yeah. But you get that in so many countries anyway. So I'm not knocking them by saying that, but it's something that you notice when you go out there. But Hungary again was sort of place I just roamed. So I was an interesting. I was actually staying in the sort of Jewish section.
What used to be
yes, exactly. So I was staying there, which is interesting. The people I was staying with, it was like a little apartment, and there was like a Brazilian football team staying there. And a couple of Spanish people joined later on. They were really nice guys and everything. And I remember, having a drink with them and putting on Boney M and, just having a good night. But then, so for the day, I would just roam around, the streets of Budapest, look, from Buda and Pest, those different sides.
Yes.
Of course, I climbed Garrett's Hill and looked out from there.
Is that with the Elizabeth Lookout with the tower, correct?
I believe so, yes.
It's in Pest, right?
Yeah, it's on the other side.
On the hilly side is, and it's got like kind of like quite a castle-looking tower on top of the hill.
I'm not sure about the castle, but it might do. I have a sort of vague recollection of a statue.
There's the ski lift which takes you up there.
I didn't take the ski. No, I went up the steps, which took a while.
This is different because there is this really big hill and it takes like 15-20 minutes on the ski lift, and me and my friends got stuck up there one January night. I genuinely thought we were going to die.
Oh god,
so that's another thing.
This is called Garrett's Hill, I think. I think that's the pronunciation. And you can climb up there just by the steps. It takes a while, but then it turns into paths and that kind of thing. As you go, it gets a bit steeper. And there's lots of statues on the way up, and there's a big statue on top. But
I know this. Is this for the like a communist memorial, isn't it? Sort of.
There is one halfway up, I believe.
Yeah. I know this. Yeah, beautiful spot actually. Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. Especially it was just at sunset as well. It was amazing. But yeah, obviously I saw things like, the Hungarian Parliament building, things like that. They've got all these lovely little, sort of castle looking buildings or just actual sort of castles and all around that. So the architecture I thought was absolutely beautiful. And the statues that you see everywhere are just gorgeous. Can't say I interacted with that many Hungarian people. That's the only thing. But I want to just get on to the picture that I sent you, the one that I chose from Hungary, which probably seemed like a strange choice considering, the other stuff that's there and the stuff to choose from. But the reason I chose this, now this is the statue of the angel Gabriel and the eagle above it.
Yeah.
This is known, I believe, as a memorial to the victims of the German occupation. So Germany, of course, Germany did occupy Hungary. So this statue, it shows the angel Gabriel, which is, I believe, a common sort of figure in Hungary in their culture.
In I think in Christianity, I think in the Orthodox, I think the Catholic religion, I think just in general, is quite a revered figure.
Now the eagle, of course, is Nazi Germany. That's what, and around its leg are the numbers 1944, which was the year of the occupation. Now, the reason I chose this to talk about was because it's actually quite a controversial statue, because whereas it's a memorial to those who lost their lives during the occupation, it's become very controversial from the perspective of a lot of Jewish groups and other groups like that, and particularly the sort of anti-fascist groups that you have in Budapest, because there is this, people have accused this statue of kind of washing its hands in the German occupation. Now, for people who are interested in history, there was a certain level of collusion between Hungary and Nazi Germany.
Mm. Yes.
So this was quite a controversial statue, because it seems to suggest that Hungary was just another, innocent nation that got, occupied by the Nazis. Whereas actually there was, some cooperation there between its leaders, which is still felt to this day. So that's kind of the reason I wanted to share this one as well, because to this day there's still this, you do feel a different kind of, especially around topics like World War II and the Holocaust, a very different feeling from Hungary than you do from other places, because of the level, I think, of not just of their involvement, but to this day, because it's not just like, what struck me was in Berlin, obviously there's loads of different, memorials to the Holocaust and things like that, where the line is effectively very much, yes, we are guilty in this and we have to remember it so it doesn't happen again. Whereas in Hungary, there seems to be this reluctance to admit that there was any, sort of wrongdoing or, anything. And again, I'm not painting a whole picture of Hungary here. I just, this is what I surmised from this particular statue and the people that were gathering around it and looking at it. Because I talked to a couple of them, and that was very much their feeling, that, to this day, it's like we still can't admit that we had some part in this, that we were somehow culpable. So I found that interesting, because it very much illuminated the kind of feeling in places like Budapest, not just about the war, but just in general. You feel it's a bit tenser there, maybe, especially between government and people.
See, I think, I think you are actually quite right there. And actually, like, well, from what I understand is that in Budapest, the population there are still generally quite they're quite liberal now. Like, they're a bit less, racism, and they admit to what Hungary has done in the past. But I think outside of Budapest, from what I understand, this is where there is a lot more of racism and right-wing support, and maybe still quite a bit of anti-Semitism. I'm not 100% sure, but this is sort of what I've gathered and what I've heard from my Hungarian friends.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know. I mean, without going into it too far, and I think the best authority you can speak to are the people of Hungary, especially people who have gone through several generations living there. So
yeah.
But yeah, very eye-opening, and that was a common sort of theme throughout. It was interesting. This whole trip was a kind of a trip into the past of Europe. It was also obviously the present and also the future as well, because there are always kind of, I went at a time of sort of political turmoil. There's always sort of things, going on in these countries politically or socially or economically. So, Europe is this very sort of strange but interesting and constantly sort of shifting. It's like an idea, really, Europe, and I think some part of me thinks that philosophy's been taken to, I think that's why it's sort of been taken to extremes, because Europe is sort of an idea, especially post World War II, and I think sometimes it's very idealized, and I think that's where a lot of tensions come from, because everyone is very, adamant to try and, it's their vision for Europe, for a united Europe or disunited Europe or, whatever. But being there, it's kind of, it's really fascinating, because it's kind of a melting pot of people, but it's also, even though there's hundreds and thousands of years of history behind it and all these things, it still feels very fragile when you go there.
Yeah, see, this is I actually think that's such an amazing way of putting it, is that Europe is an idea, because we all think of Europe as this idea, and one of the reasons I wanted to get you on this podcast is because not only because this was your first time traveling alone, is that I know that a lot of people, I think, there is this idea of Europe, that European culture, and a lot of people come to Europe just because they interrail and they party and they want to see the sights and stuff like that. But I knew that you would have quite an interesting take on it, as we've discussed, because there's a lot of history behind it. And I do feel that like European history in the UK, obviously I can't speak for the rest of Europe and stuff, is like it's a little bit more sort of dumbed down, and like people don't know about these sorts of things. Like, I mean, going back, say, even the 1800s, we talk about St. Stephen's Cathedral and stuff, we talk about the Habsburg family and things, the old royal families in Europe. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the Europe we live in today was very different in the 80s, something like, in our parents' generation. And like you say, Europe is going to be this ever shifting change, because it's one of the biggest centers of culture and etc. And, so with that, like, it's really, I can't remember where I was going with this. It's really like important to see that, like, that there is more to Europe than just that
Uh, uh,
party. and
Absolutely, yeah.
and look, I mean, all the places we've described as we've been going through this podcast, you haven't, looking at a map, you haven't necessarily covered extensively a lot of distance, but look how much different culture is within those borders.
Exactly. And I think you really nailed it there when you sort of any place you go, and this is even, within your own back door.
Hmm.
Any place you go, you have to look at the yin and yang. You have to take the good with the bad. And this is what my advice is for people going to Europe and traveling and backpacking is, yeah, have a good time and, have a party and, that kind of thing. But, give the devil his due as well. Think about it's you go to these places and you have this, amazing sense of freedom. It is also just as important to, be reminded of where that freedom has come from as
Hmm.
well.
Exactly.
And it really feels like that in Europe. You can feel the history everywhere, and you can feel that every single detail of any place that you go in Europe has hundreds of thousands of years of context behind it and different sides as well, you know.
Yes. I mean, you even look, like, as you're saying, looking in your own backyard, look at France, look at France's system and the way it's adapted from the Napoleonic Code coming in.
Mm.
It's constantly changing and it's adapting. And I think that, I mean, we could be seeing a shift as we speak I mean, I don't want to get too much into the politics talk, but obviously with the Brexit happening, is that, we could be coming into seeing another quite different shift in how Europe will operate and act, especially with this coronavirus
Yeah,
as well, because, we're got to probably expect a tightening of borders and maybe a bit more restriction on travel for at least a while. And then we'll have to see what that will do to the tourism industry, because there are some places where, like you say, Prague and Budapest, they thrive on tourism. A lot
yeah,
of, and businesses, they need tourism. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with that, particularly in Europe as well.
absolutely. And if I can leave your visitors with one thing to sort of ponder on, so visitors, listeners, you're not a museum, but if I could leave your listeners with anything to sort of ponder on in times like this as well, I would say, look, I don't know what's going to happen with regards to, borders being reopened and stuff like that, but if there's anything this has taught me, and reflecting back on this trip that I took over a year ago now, don't put things off. Don't do tomorrow what you can do today, because again, as we've seen, Europe is an idea and it's a constantly changing one. It has to adapt with whatever's going on. So, for instance, this idea of Europe of open borders and unity has come into question recently with everything that's going on with COVID-19, especially the closing of the borders. If those borders could be closed in a day after decades of being open, and this idea of unity, for that to go from, one vision to every country essentially having to fend for themselves and borders being closed, it just goes to show you that, your right to travel was a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily a right. That can change because, rights aren't just taken away, privileges are. So, as I said, Europe is, it feels like it's on a knife edge at times. That's the case for everywhere, really. So if you want to go out and, see these places and really explore, those are the things I would say. Really look at the big picture of wherever you're going. Explore the history of it, the good and the bad, but also, don't put it off.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's great. It's sound advice as well. And like, just to sort of bring the podcast to an end now, is that you summed it up before I asked you as well. Like, what would you say? Because what would you say to people who are worrying about going on their own, and just, what advice would you give to them? But like you say, is that, it is a luxury to be able to travel, and you should never put it off, because I know so many people who are, when they've got older, they said, I wish I traveled more.
Yeah, and you will. You will get to that point you say, and look, traveling is not for everyone. I know people who don't like traveling. I know
Yeah,
people that are very content to, stay in one place forever, and that's absolutely fine. Especially as some of them live in very amazing places. But
exactly.
if travel does if it does sort of call to you like it does to people like us, that's the only advice I could do is just do it.
Yeah, you got to
Do
do
it.
it, because
Do it well, do it properly, but do it. That's ultimately, and some things are gonna go bad, some things are gonna go amazingly, but you'll never know if you don't do it.
it's all about the road. It's all about the road, and I think that's very important, very sound. Right. Thank you, Callum. That was an absolute pleasure. Really, really enjoyed that. I hope all you listeners did too. And go on there, you can do your promotion for your blog, because you are a podcaster as well. Am I right?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. So if you want to check me out, CR Strang on Facebook. Lots of different podcasts, including one with Raj recently. So yeah, give us a listen. And it was an absolute pleasure to be with you
Yeah.
here today, mate.
Yeah. Thank you. And those are also on YouTube, right, as well?
Yes, they're on YouTube. Sorry,
Uh,
yeah, the main channel on YouTube. But yeah, if you want to sort of keep up to date with things that are happening, Facebook's probably the best one. But yeah, YouTube, CR Strang.
yeah, definitely give them a follow. He does some really interesting blog posts and writing. We're really interested. Right. Thanks again, Callum. Thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
No worries.